excited to dive in. So what we've been building for the last couple of weeks is we've been working on a new implementation of the Tokenbound contracts that match up with some of the changes that came through in the standard a few weeks ago. And so these new implementations are hopefully going to fix a lot of the kind of annoying parts of working with the Tokenbound accounts from previously, as well as introduce some really cool new features and functionality that you can build on top of. And make some of the things that we were experimenting with in the first version a lot easier to use. So that's the big thing coming down the pipe. We're in the middle of an audit right now, so that should be complete very soon, and we'll share some details about that when it's done. But then once that's out, we'll be doing a bit of a rollout from the current version of Tokenbound accounts to this newer version. And so we've talked about this migration a couple times in the past, and again, we're going to have some documentation for how to do this on your end if you're building apps on top of Tokenbound accounts. But we'll roll that out once it rolls out. But the long and the short of it is there's a new implementation coming down the pipe, and it's got some cool things in it. And so I'm gonna share some code of some of this if any of y'all are interested in. And we can walk through some of the things that are new, some of the kind of unique things about Tokenbound accounts that are, as far as we know, haven't really been tried before. And then kind of chat a little bit about how you guys can set up well for your projects for using 6551 with this new update rolling out. So let me know when y'all can see my screen. Awesome. So if any of you are curious about looking at these new versions of the contracts, it's in the Tokenbound contracts repo on this account v3 branch. So this is where you can see all of the v3 account changes here. And this is the core account contract. Not a ton has changed. There's a little bit of difference in how we're handling token ownership to make dealing with nested Tokenbound accounts a little bit easier. One of the things that was kind of a pain in the previous versions of the account, had some edge cases that were kind of a pain to deal with, was deeply nested Tokenbound accounts. So what happens when you have an NFT that owns an NFT that owns an NFT, and it goes pretty deep? It can be kind of a pain to manage those relationships once you go really deep in the tree. And so one of the things that we've done is we've made all of the settings on all of the Tokenbound accounts in that tree dependent on the owner of the top level Tokenbound account. So if you set the permissions or set the overrides or do anything on a account lower in the tree, it's based on you, the owner, at the highest level of the tree. And what that means is when the top level ownership is changed, all of the settings reset on that whole tree, rather than having to do that a little bit more manually as in the previous version. So kudos to Punk8, who was pointing this out in the Discord a little while ago. That's all fixed up in this version of the account contract. But one of the really neat things about this is we've expanded the execution model of Tokenbound accounts. So previously, if you were using Tokenbound accounts, there was the execute call function. And so you would send all of your transactions from the Tokenbound account through the execute call function. And all you could do was direct calls on an account. You couldn't do delegate calls. You couldn't create contracts without using an intermediary contract. And so we've cleaned up that interface quite a bit. And in the new version of the EIP, there's this 6551 executor class. And so one of the things that is changing with this migration is instead of calling execute call, you'll call the execute function on the Tokenbound account. And importantly, on the execute, there's this new value called operation. This lets you execute different types of operations from your Tokenbound account. So now you can execute delegate calls, you can execute creates, you can execute create to. So your Tokenbound account can actually deploy its own smart contracts, which is pretty cool. And we've got lots of things in here to make that all work well. But we went even further than that. So the EIP specifies this execution interface, but it also allows you to support additional custom execution interfaces. And we built a couple of those that we think are really important. One of those is nested account execution. So again, going back to that situation where an NFT owns an NFT owns an NFT, previously, if you wanted to execute on that third level Tokenbound account, the lowest one of the tree, you would have to call into the top level Tokenbound account, which would call into the second level, which would call into the third level. And because additional calls in Solidity are exponential in terms of gas usage, that was really expensive. And it was also just a pain to do when you're doing it in the SDK. But now we have this nested account executor, which lets you execute calls directly against the third, like that lowest level Tokenbound account. So instead of calling into the top level Tokenbound account with your transaction, you with your wallet will call into whatever level you want to execute on, and you submit a proof of ownership. This will include details about all the Tokenbound accounts that are above this NFT. And this essentially proves that you are the owner or authorized on one of the Tokenbound accounts above this Tokenbound account in the tree. It means you can execute on this directly. This saves a ton of gas when doing nested execution. It also means that it's way simpler if you're building apps that rely on nested execution. So we think this is going to be really important, and hopefully this makes it a lot easier. This was one of the things that was really highly requested, both in the EIP thread as well as we've seen some things in the Tokenbound accounts working group on this. And so we've added this feature in the new V3 of the account. Then a couple of other things. The other thing is batch execution. So you can execute Tokenbound, you can execute transactions in batch in two ways. The first is you can just execute batch transactions on a single account. So if you want to do 5 transactions, you don't have to do 5 individual calls on 5 individual MetaMask prompts. You can bake all of those into a single transaction. This saves you a bunch of gas. It also just makes it easier if you want to do kind of complex multi-step processes with a Tokenbound account. This is one of those things the previous account didn't have, but it's just kind of a base necessary thing for a smart contract account. So we've added that in this new version. Another thing we've added is batch execution across multiple Tokenbound accounts. Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to you guys for pushing for the bulk transaction thing. We've also added transaction execution across multiple accounts. So what this means is if you are an NFT owner and you own 10 NFTs and you want to do the same action on all 10 NFT accounts, you can do that in a single transaction. You can call into this multi-call forwarder contract that we have and specify the details of the Tokenbound accounts you want to execute against. And then you can execute the same transaction or different transactions across multiple Tokenbound accounts, the same transaction, rather than just being limited to calling a single Tokenbound account. So if you had, say there was an airdrop you could claim in 10 Tokenbound accounts, you previously would have had to do 10 transactions to claim that in all of your accounts, but now you can do that in a single transaction using this forwarder. So hopefully this is really helpful. I know for some of the DAO stuff that the DAO House team is doing, this is really important. So we've added that. The other thing, this is a pretty unique feature of Tokenbound accounts so far. One of the challenges with using delegate call in smart contract accounts is that delegate call gives you full access to account storage, which means it's really easy to open up vulnerabilities. If you look at things like safe, if you give a safe module access to your safe, that module could take control of your safe from you and change the settings on the safe. So you have to be really, really careful who you give access to the modules or the delegate call permissions on a smart contract account. And this is even further complicated in the case of Tokenbound accounts, because Tokenbound accounts are meant to be transferred. They're meant to be sent between people, which means that theoretically, if you allowed arbitrary delegate calls, a malicious owner of a Tokenbound account could set permissions for another user, then transfer the NFT to them, but then rug that user, which is just a really bad situation. So what we've done to prevent against this is we've created this concept of a sandbox executor. So what a sandbox is it's a very simple smart contract. If you're curious about this, there is the bytecode for it is in here. It's about the size of a minimal proxy contract. But what this contract does is this contract executes arbitrary delegate calls in a separate call context from the account. So when you execute a delegate call in any of the executors in the new 6551 implementation, I would just go down to libexecutor, which handles this. When you execute a delegate call, instead of actually doing a delegate call from the account context, which is really risky and can cause security vulnerabilities, it executes a call to the sandbox contract. And then the sandbox contract executes the delegate call on behalf of the account. That means that you have custom execution. You can execute arbitrary code, but you can't modify storage on the account. So the risk of storage attacks is basically wiped out. There's no risk of storage attacks. But you can't, this allows you the full flexibility of arbitrary code execution from delegate call. So this is a really nice balance. Another thing that this allows you to do is this sandbox, because it's deployed at a known address, it's deployed using create2. So every Tokenbound account will now come with its own sandbox account address. This sandbox account is authorized to execute low-level calls from the account contract itself. So you can write plugins for Tokenbound accounts that are executed within the context of the sandbox, but are still able to execute calls and creates and create2s on the Tokenbound account. We'll be releasing some documentation on this, but this is a really interesting module or model for custom modules on a smart contract account that basically means you don't have to deal with the security risks of allowing arbitrary delegate calls. So we've done some research on this. This is going to be audited, so we'll share some details about that. But this opens up a lot of flexibility for you to create custom account modules for Tokenbound accounts without worrying about security risks if your users use it. So again, we'll have lots of stuff here. This will be really good. The same things that you know and love about the existing account contract are there. You can lock the account. You can set overrides on it, which is kind of like a mini diamond style upgradable. You can override the function that is called for any signature on the contract. So you can override the on ERC721 received function for a Tokenbound account and run custom logic in there if you want to. This gives you a lot of flexibility to build custom things on the smart contract account without having to build your own smart contract. You don't have to go and build out everything in a smart contract account in order to customize just one little thing about it. So again, we've got some better documentation on this coming. And there's also permission. So this is kind of like built-in delegation. If you own a Tokenbound account, you can give anyone access to using that Tokenbound account for the duration that you're the owner of it. So that's awesome. A couple of other features we've added that are new in this version. One is cross-chain support for OP stack chains. So by default, you'll be able to execute on Tokenbound accounts on OP stack chains from mainnet. If you own a mainnet NFT, that mainnet NFT will be able to execute using its Tokenbound account on any OP stack chain just out of the box by using the Optimism portal. I see there's a hand raised, so go for it, Rabbit. Oh, looks like you dropped. Okay. Feel free to ask a question when you hop back on, Ravi. Yeah, so there's going to be built-in support for Optimism. If you want to execute transactions using a mainnet NFT on Optimism, that'll be built in. You can call in the Optimism contract. And that means that all OP-Stack chains are natively supported by Tokenbound accounts, which is really cool. We think there's going to be a lot of things built there. And then one last thing. One last thing that we've added that is just kind of standard on most smart contract accounts is the ability to sign on behalf of a smart contract. So we've had EIP 1271 support before. We've had the ability for a Gnosis Safe or something else to own a Tokenbound account and execute on it. But we've added a new way of formatting signatures that makes it way easier to sign on behalf of a smart contract account within your DApp. You no longer have to only sign from the owner, which is true in the previous version. If the Tokenbound account was owned by a smart contract account, the only signature that could be valid was the owner's signature, but this opens up a lot more flexibility. Finally, the account proxy. So one of the crazy things that is one of the things that is most frustrating to people right now is this initializer. There's a lot of things around the initializer that are confusing. It's kind of a pain to set this up, and so we've changed this a little bit, the structure of the account proxy, to both make it easier to work with, as well as mean that you will only ever have to deploy one Tokenbound account proxy, and then every version of the Tokenbound accounts, you'll be able to reuse the same address, but upgrade to the newest Tokenbound implementation. This is quite a bit better than the previous version where you would have to migrate directly. So anyways, lots of changes. We're very excited about this. And we're going to share some documentation, some things in the coming days and weeks. But there's lots of features in here that are going to be way easier for those of you building on Tokenbound accounts to use.